Next, I would like to invite Mr. Sergei to speak. So you'll have to unmute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, I can hear you now. Yes, yes, it's clear.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you. So, thank you very much for inviting me to this panel. Thank you, Your Excellency Minister, for sharing your thoughts. I will say a few words about the general recent consensus in economics and political science literature on the issue, and I'll also talk briefly about 2 or 3 pieces of research I've recently done on the issue. So, in general, as the minister correctly said, people are convinced that institutions, good institutions, are conducive to growth. And that includes, of course, indeed, anti-corruption institutions, fighting corruption. Corruption is present everywhere, including in countries like Denmark and New Zealand, but the degree is very, very different. And we do know that fighting corruption is easier in democratic countries. There are exceptions, and Singapore is one of those exceptions. But as development economists would say, for each South Korea, we have hundreds of Zaires. And Singapore is different in many ways because it's inherited a British legal system. It had an enlightened leader who was very strict in terms of fighting corruption, and also because it's a small state. And fighting corruption in a small country, in one city-state, is easier because you observe so much going on, and so you don't really need democratic mechanisms such as active civil society and independent media, which alert you on the bribery, fraud that your subordinates commit. Now, that said, I should say that recent research by Darona Simoglu and James Robinson and their co-authors Pascal Restrepo and Suresh Naidu shows that there is a correlation between democratic institutions and economic growth, and this correlation is causal. So they show that democratization causes acceleration of economic growth. And this, in fact, is not trivial. So their paper, which was published 2 years ago, is called literally "Democracy Does Cause Growth." And this is what we believe in the field. We also think that, as the minister said, that there may be the opposite, the reverse causality as well. That as countries modernize, they're more likely to consolidate democracies. This is a long debate in political science literature, what's called modernization hypothesis, that democracy is easier to sustain in a country where you have middle class. And of course, there are exceptions to that as well. But until recently, and actually, as of now, until today, actually, the richest country that moved from democracy to autocracy was Argentina in 1976, and no country richer than that country, which is a middle income level of prosperity, has ever moved from democracy to autocracy. Now, if democratization happens, it's easier to sustain if you have certain level of development. So causality may go both ways, but we definitely know that institutions and democratic institutions in particular are conducive to fighting corruption, and fighting corruption itself promotes economic growth, exactly for the reasons the minister has mentioned. Corruption is costly because it slows down firm operations. It's a tax on growth, and this tax is especially costly because it's illicit and therefore frightens investors who want to invest in the long run. Now, we recently, with Raymond Fissman, wrote a paper which is based on 90,000 firms. So we took all the enterprise surveys conducted by the World Bank and other development institutions, including the Ph.D, including ADB, including the Inter-American Development Bank, over the last 15 years. So we collected data on 90,000 firms around the world, for the last 15 years. And we try to see to what extent corruption is good or bad for economic growth at the firm level. And we identified major effects. The firms that face higher bribe tax grow slower, and this is true in all countries, countries which are honest or corrupt. And this effect is substantial. So this is not surprising at all, but it is the first paper which is based not just on one country and not just on one survey, but on the all surveys that are available that ask questions about corruption. And Ray Kinsman, by the way, is the person who wrote this paper on diplomatic party tickets 15 years ago, which I highly recommend. And based on this paper, they wrote a book called The Economic Gangsters. But also, he recently, 5 years ago, wrote a book which is called Corruption, What Everybody Needs to Know. And I highly recommend everybody to read this book, which summarizes the recent research on corruption, the causes and consequences of corruption around the world. Now, the other piece of research I would like to mention in my remarks is related to what the minister was talking about. So we just published a paper on the impact of the spread of mobile broadband internet on politics. So together with my co-authors, Nikita Melnikov and Ekaterina Zhuravskaya, we published a paper in the Quarterly Journal of Economics literally 3 months ago, which is called 3G Internet and Confidence in Government, where we collect data on the whole world at the subnational regional level of rollout of 3G and 4G technology. And we look at the causal effects of this new access of new internet technology around the world on attitudes to government. Why is it important? Because in the last 15 years, this technology has brought mobile broadband internet to pretty much the whole world. In 2007, about 4% of global population have access to broadband internet. And today, this number, on average in the world, is close to 80%. In developed countries, it's 100%, more than 100% actually. And most of broadband internet today is mobile. Fixed broadband internet has grown, but very little. And that has changed the access to information. That has changed transparency. The minister was talking about how people know about corruption. And that has changed dramatically. And we show in this paper that that resulted in major negative impact on attitudes to politicians. The minister has mentioned that functioning politicians have low approval ratings. Part of that is due to the spread of this new radical transparency due to mobile internet. Now, some countries understand that and use censorship, and wherever censorship is effective, this effect, of course, doesn't work. But where internet is not fully censored, then what we get is a major negative impact on attitudes to government. Now, that is especially strong where governments are actually corrupt. We have certain measures of actual corruption, and I will not talk about that. But when we look at the link between actual corruption and perceived corruption, this link is especially strong in countries, and not just countries, but in places, in regions, subnational provinces, where there is more access to mobile broadband internet. So when you don't have internet, the government may be corrupt, but people will not know about that. When you do have internet, that you actually have this connection, and we live in an era of new radical transparency, where some politicians have not still realized that, but where people know much more about corruption. And I hope that will eventually result in reduction of corruption. Until now, it has actually contributed to the rise of populism. We show in this paper that in Europe, the spread of mobile broadband internet has contributed to the increase in vote for populist parties, because they are the main beneficiary of this anti-system, anti-establishment movement, accusing the elites, the mainstream politicians, of corruption, and in many ways, rightly so. But overall, I hope that mainstream politicians will get their act together and regain the lost ground. understanding that no longer they can be as corrupt as before. Well, I wouldn't say that they were too corrupt, but I would say that it turns out we learned from, for example, Panama Papers or other offshore leaks that many politicians, even in clean countries, have been doing things which are viewed by the public as reproachable. And in that sense, I hope that this new technology will allow improving transparency and reducing corruption around the world, including developing countries, which will have a very positive impact on institutions and growth. Now, one thing before finishing, I would mention that in this research, we also look at the very clean countries. As I said, there is corruption in Denmark as well. But of course, that results in immediate resignation of politicians. But what I would say here is when we look at the top 10, 15 cleanest countries in the world, such as Northern European countries, Anglo-Saxon countries, but the US unfortunately is not the cleanest country in the world, Switzerland. When we look at the group of these countries, we actually see that the spread of mobile broadband internet is increasing confidence in government and reducing the perception that these governments are corrupt. Why? Because these governments are relatively clean, and probably when people learn that Denmark is less corrupt than the United States, or that Switzerland is less corrupt than France, they actually start respecting their governments more. So it's not crazy public nihilism that we observe. If the government is clean, the citizens learn about this and respect their governments more. And that opens an opportunity for all politicians around the world to learn from this and understand that when you live in this new glass building, when you live in this new radically transparent environment, if you behave well, people will know that and respect that. So let me wrap up here. Once again, I would say that to summarize, corruption is bad for growth. Democracy is good for fighting corruption. And luckily, we have new tools to fight corruption through radical transparency that civil anti-corruption activists are using everywhere right now. And if politicians realize that, they may actually benefit from that. Let me stop here. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sergei, for your amazing speech. It'll also be great if you could maybe share the research paper that you published recently with us. It looks very, very interesting. I can also share it with the other panelists. And with this, I would like to
absolutely, I will do that. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.